Hello everybody. We would like to welcome you in today's open session, which is dedicated to Metamodel of application. We will briefly tell you something about connection of application to business territory, and then we will focus on Metamodel of application. So we will present everything you need to know to prepare a Metamodel of your application to be able to connect into business territory. Today's open session will be led by me. I'm Luboš Fitztum, and I'm product manager of business territory. And with me here is Daniel Madle. He's a technology architect of this product, and he will show you some, let's say, some live demos about how the Metamodel is calculated in business territory cache. So let's begin. At first, I want to tell you something about why we want to connect application into business territory. I suppose that everyone who looking at this open session hears this because this topic is especially for the is for users who have some experience with business territory. And this is because of the benefits which the connection could bring to your application. First one is organizational structure, which is provided by business territory. So there are organizational units with roles, groups, and such stuff, where the identities of end users could have casts, and from this organizational structure, which can easily, let's say, simulate the organizational structure of any organization or institution, are then derived access rights. So the second benefit which comes from business territory are access right management. And let's say that the most important thing about this is that the access rights are primarily calculated according to the organizational structure. So if the object of your application is connected into business territory, it's represented here by artifact of by an artifact, and according to the location of the artifact in organizational structure. According to the location of artifact in organizational structure, the access rights could be calculated. And also there is possibility to add access rights to, let's say, individual roles. Then the third thing, which is really important, it's activities. So when you have your object represented in business territory, you can easily create activities over it. So it means you can add some workflow to this object. Without necessity to implement everything around it, and these activities are also notified or aggregated for any user or every user in the user's digital workspace, where all these activities from different territories are aggregated, and any user have a, let's say, good idea about which tasks are assigned to him, or which task he assigned to some other people. And also, let's say, activities like meetings are in the digital workspace, so the calendar of user can be prepared or can be seen in the digital workspace. Another thing, artifact relations. This is a feature which allows to, let's say, coupling different applications together, because relation is between artifact A and artifact B, and this artifact could be artifact of different applications, and this application don't need to know something about them, and easily by, let's say, creation of this relation, you will tell to the application of the artifact B that you are using data of the artifact, you work with them, and that's why you, let's say, don't want to allow the deletion of the artifact. In fact, the application which is owner of artifact B this application could delete the artifact, but it's decision of the application, and let's say it's not good to do it if it's not really necessary from the point of view of the application B. So we make this because we don't want to get a deadlock. So it doesn't mean that if this relation is created, you blocked some applications to do things that they want. So it's about this. And the last thing, which is here, is a full text search, because this is one of the features of business territory. And when you add your object into territory by the artifact which represented, you also getting the possibility to index any information about this object, not only name of the artifact or its description, but also some other informations. Let's say if it's a document, you can have in the full text search the content of the document or something like this. Also, the content of activities could be in the full text search. So during the searching, you will have possibility to get all this information. And the, let's say, best thing of this is that when you're searching, you obtain only in the result set are only information which you are authorized to. So if let's say relevant information is on some artifact you are not authorized, not permitted to use, you will not get this artifact or this artifact in the result. So that's about the benefits of business territory. Now briefly about the process of connection of application to business territory, and then we will go on our main topic, which is preparation of Metamodel. So if you want to have application in a business territory, you need to let's say manage a few things. First of all, you need to define Metamodel. Metamodel is simply JSON structure which describes all the stuff that business territory needs to know about your application, your let's say application types which are represented by artifacts in the territory, and it's everything the territory needs to know to provide the features we talk about. So to be able to provide proper access rights, to be able to create activities over them, to be able to index them into search and create artifact relations. So this is necessary for the features the business territory need and want to do with the artifact which represents your objects. If you have Metamodel prepared, which means it's a couple of JSON files, you need to install such a Metamodel into business territory. The installation is, let's say, it's a simple process, because there is a special command, install uuApp, which is provided by territory, and when a permitted user call this command with input of zip archive or JSON file with definition of Metamodel, the Metamodel is created in business territory. You cannot, let's say, cannot initialize your application in the territory before Metamodel is in the territory. Then a crucial thing for you when you're preparing the application is the initialization of uuApp Workspace. This means that workspace of your application will be connected to business territory. It means this artifact, AWSC type, which represents the application workspace, is created in the organizational structure of business territory, and the authorization of the workspace is connected to this artifact. After this connection, your application or access rights of your application are calculated according to business territory structure and business territory access rights. Together with this artifact, there could also be a lot of other artifacts, like you can you may need to prepare a whole unit for your application, or a couple of folders which are needed for another artifact you will create, which are OBCs, the ones which represents your objects, or objects of your application workspace, of your application. So to prepare this initialization, special command or script is needed, and this let's say topic will be presented in some other open session, when we will present you a dev kit, which should help you to prepare this command and all the stuffs which are around initialization of UUAVSC. Then there is a OBC management. It's simply about commands which work with your objects and creates artifacts which represents them in structure of business territory. Also setting state on them, closing them, updating their attributes, and the last thing which must be solved or resolved is termination of uuAWSC. It's the last, but you cannot forget about it, because if you want to be able to, let's say, disconnect your workspace from business territory or close the application, it's necessary to prepare this process and prepare a command which allows users to let's say terminate your workspace in business territory. But so it's simply the process of connection of application to business territory, and now we will go to application uuApp Metamodel and its definition. Okay, so let's go to Metamodel. What it defines. In Metamodel, there are defined all the objects of application. So it means there is definition of uuAWSC, so the definition of artifact which represents workspaces of your application, and their definition is prepared in a uuApp Metamodel attributes of this artifact uuApp Metamodel, and there is also aggregated objects here, and they are called uuApp types, and this uuApp types represents description for uuOBC artifacts, so some objects of your application workspace which you want to represent as artifact in business territory. For both of these let's say types, it's necessary to define their profiles, their states, and it's also necessary to define mappings of their commands, or let's say use cases, to the profiles. So in case of AWSC, we have profiles of application which need to be mapped to or commands which need to be mapped to the profiles of application. In case of aggregated object of the Metamodel, in case of OBCs, we need to map them to application profiles, because every use case you called in application must be authorized against Workspace. But if you need, you can define uptype profiles, and in such a case you need to map the commands also on uptype profiles, and you are able to authorize on the level of object control, so you can authorize according to the object. Let's say in this case, if we will talk about application docket, there is such an object as uptype is document, and for every document you can have a separate access rights, separate permissions, so this is defined for them. In case of bookit, where you have a book, there are no objects and everything is authorized just against Workspace because nothing else is here. And let's say the third case which could be used here is like application first line support, which has its Metamodel, it must have every application, and it also has its type, it's a issue of this application. So issue is object control, OBC. It's represented as artifact, but it doesn't have its own uptype profiles. It has only profiles of application. So the commands are authorized only against Workspace and never against the OBC as well. So another stuff which could be defined here are activities, roads. Activities, it's easy. These are the activities which are over the artifacts, and they are same over AWSC and also over OBC. And there are also roads, and for every artifact there are the same roads which are prepared for any of them, and we will talk about it when we get to the definition of roads. Also artifact relations. This definition is also absolutely same for uuApp Metamodel, for AWSC, and for application type for OBC. And last thing which should be defined in Metamodel, it's organizational context property. These are this can be defined only on the level of application Metamodel, and in this level you can set on which types of this Metamodel, on which application types could be this context property used. So according to this, we prepare the templates. So if you want to prepare your own Metamodel, there are prepared templates, and in these templates you have a template of AWSC and template of OBC. It's prepared as a JSON, and if you are starting with definition of Metamodel, you can download these templates and set them as you want. But it's a good start because there are all the necessary things you need to prepare when you're preparing Metamodel. Okay, let's go to the let's go to the specific attributes which are on the Metamodel. So first thing is this. Sorry, I will just use the never mind. Sorry. Schema version. It's a new thing which was added when we prepared this new version of Metamodel. It's important to define it in your in the JSON file, because that's how we find out that your Metamodel is defined according to the new structure, which should help you to let's say do it easy way, and also not to do so many mistakes, because the, let's say, previous version wasn't so easy to prepare, and now we have some improvements. So I will tell in every topic when there is some change according to the previous version. I will also mention what is the change and why we do it. So next is code. Code must be a unique code of the Metamodel within business territory, and code is simply code of application. So vendor, app, sub-app, and generation. In the territory can be only one Metamodel of the application, and you can. So this means you cannot have two different versions of Metamodel in one territory. So only one version of application could be installed in the territory, and you can simply recognize it by this code. Then you have to specify the name. The name is also easy. It's the name of I wouldn't say Metamodel, but let's say it's name of application. and description, we can say that it's a description of the sub-application which is described by the Metamodel. Then, very important, don't forget about it, because also another rule which says that let's say there could be hundreds or thousands of territories or workspaces of business territory in one ACID, and most of the applications are, let's say, in the same versions or not in many versions. So it doesn't make sense to store the metamodels in cache according to workspaces of business territory, but it's much better to store them according to the whole ACID of business territory, the whole instance. So because of this, it's really important when you make any change in your metamodel, you need to increase the version of the metamodel, because in a cache of business territory instance, we store metamodels according to their versions. So if you made a change, you must increase the version. If you don't do it, it will be not possible to install such a version of metamodel into any territory, because if there already exists some metamodel of your application in the same version, and they are not the same, because we are checking if the metamodels doesn't differ, you will be not allowed to install it. So anytime you make a change in metamodel, and doesn't matter how big, it's if you change the default icon, it's a change. So you need to increase the version. So then default icon, another attribute. This default icon just means a default icon of AWSC artifacts, which will be created according to this definition. So this is the icon for your for the representation of your application workspace, and it must be some uuBML icon from uuBML library. Default category, a new attribute which we added in the version 1 of this metamodel. Simply, you must choose one of the categories we have defined for business territory. So it should be business, control, organizational, or system. It does only the fact that when you're creating your artifact, this value will be added as a default when you're creating your artifact. Easily, business, to take some examples, let's say if you have a docket, the document is some artifact which is of a business type. When we talk about, let's say, application workspace, AWSC control of any application, it's probably control. When we will talk about Sprintman, in Sprintman nearly all the artifacts should be taken as a control because they are serving for controlling of some task or of some stuff. When we will talk about elementary management, probably key task could be control, and I don't know, meeting could be business probably. Organizational, it's something we used mostly in business territory. It's about folders and organizational units, and system. It's let's say it's reserved for necessary artifacts which we need for functionality of business territory. So the base data structure and some other stuffs. So that's about the category, and we use it because it could help us with when we do statistics. Yeah, in statistics we will be able to calculate some let's say statistics according to the types of or categories of artifacts. So this was the, let's say, easy to explain attributes which are pretty simple and don't need a special sites in this guide and any other special stuff. And then we go to the other things which I will show you on the separate sites, and we will talk more about them. These are profile lists, because they need to be defined together with default permission metrics. It's about access rights. We will talk about ancestor path list. So this is about the ancestors of your application workspace or application workspace control or object control. Then there should be a data schema and state list. It will be about the states. Ancestor map, it's also about ancestors. Synchronized map, this is about configuration of the application, about overloading, overriding of commands and synchronizing of attributes of artifact and attributes of your application or objects of this application. And there are also the use case profile map, which is about mapping the use cases to the defined profiles. Organizational context property, AARs, activity map, roadmap. And in case we are on AWSC, we have also possibility to define a UU type map if we are defining the, let's say, the whole application in one JSON file. And sorry, I will just briefly show also the definition of application type, means definition for OBC. And you can see that there is also code, but in the code I want to mention this important thing. The code is defined as the code of application slash and the code of this application type. It's really important to use it, and we will talk about it when we will talk about the definition of use case profile map and such stuff. Then the things are same. So we have here also name. You need to pick a name for the your application type. Add some description of this type. You need to prepare states. You need to choose some icon, or not need, but if you don't choose an icon, it doesn't look good in the structure of business territory or in the links and so on. You need to choose a category, and then you have a possibility to define, or you need to define profiles, default permission metrics, ancestor path list, and so on and so on. So we will go through these stuffs one by one. So definition of profiles and definition of permission metrics. I suppose that anyone who is watching know about the permissions and how the access rights in business territory are working, and to be able to do it, we need to properly define profiles and app type profiles in Metamodel. App profiles. These are profiles of application, and they are on application workspace only. App type profiles are specific for object templates, so they are specific for OBCs. Using these profiles, you can define up to 32 of them, and also you can, but at least one must be here, and you can define up to 42 profiles of object, but for object, as I said, you don't need to define any profile if you don't want to authorize against on the level of objects or of artifact of OBC type. And what you need to do is to prepare permission metrics, or let's say default permission metrics, which will tell to the territory how these profiles should be mapped to the unit groups of the unit. It's necessary to proper work of implicit permissions of business territory. And as you can see, there could be also 32 or 1 up to 32 unit groups. So when you prepare this mapping, you can have at most you can have a matrix which is 32 columns and 32 rows. And when we talk about the metrics, the rows means profiles, and the columns represents unit groups. For this to be, let's say, to show it to you a little bit better, I suppose you all knew this. This is the artifact permission setting over. You can show it over any artifact, and here in these rows, here are the profiles you defined on your artifact, and here you can see the unit groups which are defined on in the unit where the artifact is located. In the, let's say, in the metrics, there is always 32 positions, but in this visual use case we are showing only those where the unit groups really exist. So if you see this unit groups, it's few of the defined unit groups which have a reserved position, like authorities, managers, executives, superiors, auditors, and guests. And they have a different position. You don't see the positions here, but we show only the ones which really exist in the unit. So I will go to the profiles and I will mention some important things you need to know. So for AWSC, you need to define at least one profile. The profiles you are defining in the Metamodel should be the same as are in the application, because the application could theoretically work without business territory, and you have profiles in here, and you mapping your commands or use cases are mapped to these profiles. But what is important in a business territory, you never need to use these profiles of application, the system ones, avid owner or public. These are never authorized against the logic of business territory. They are authorized before it, so you don't need to have them in your profile list in business territory. So you need to have at least one profile on AWSC, and probably you don't need to have profiles on OBSC if you don't want to. And if you defining profile, you need to set code of the profile, name of the profile, description of the profile, and there are two special attributes. One is disable implicit permissions. It means that you can say that you don't want to allow, let's say, setting permissions on instances different than it's set in a default permission matrix. So the users will be not allowed to change these permission settings. It could be good when you want, maybe for the AWSC, when you don't want to allow the changes of the permissions. So you want that only authorities can do something, and you don't want to let users to change it to some other unit groups. And second one, enabled explicit types. It means that you can let's say you can say which types of roles and groups are allowed to be set for explicit permissions. It could, by default, it's any role group interface, so groups, roles, unit groups, territory groups, and access roles, and you can limit it to any type of this. So let's just briefly take a look on some examples. So this could be some standard profile list. Yeah, you have free profiles. There is no limit on permissions, so you can set permissions, implicit permissions on any artifact as you want, and there are no special things about explicit permissions, so you can set explicit permissions for role group interfaces, authorities, executives, readers. Simply these three attributes, and the profile is code name and description, and the profile is defined. when you don't want to allow the changes of implicit of the settings from default permission metrics for the profile, you just use disable implicit permissions, true. Explicit permission setting is limited. You can limit it as you want. So if you want to limit possibility to set explicit permissions to just persons, you can simply add this type to the enabled explicit permission type, and it means you will be able to set explicit permissions only for persons. If you want to disable it, you can have an empty array here, and if you want to allow it, let's say, just for role interfaces and for territory groups, you can add it like here. You can also add any, let's say, any other or more of the types in the array, but when you think about it, we have a lot of interfaces which cover a few of roles and access roles and so on. So you mostly don't need to tell all of them. You just pick the correct interface you want to use. And according to profiles, it's necessary to prepare permission metrics, because as I mentioned before, the number of rows of permission metrics must be same as the number of defined profiles in a profile list. And once again, if you want to, we have this, or let's say, once again, we have you have 32 positions in here. I will go there so you can see it also. So when you're defining permission metrics, there are rows which represent the permission profiles. So this is for authorities, this is for executives, and this is for readers. And these have 32 positions. The binary masks have 32 positions because there could be up to 32 unit groups. The rule is that first position in the first row must be always set to 1. If not, we will set it to 1 instead of you, because we need to have some, let's say, user or unit group which will have permissions to the artifact, and this one is the authorities which is on the first position. On the second position are managers, and the managers also these are managers. And there are the other positions which are mentioned above. So we have executives, they are on the third position. Then superiors, they are created to the organizational unit, and they are on the 20. I don't know. They are here on the 29th position. There are guests or auditors which are on the 30th position, and on the last position are guests. And you can see that if we try to do this, authorities, executives, and readers, it's almost or good practice is to set it like authorities and managers have same rights, then executives have some other rights, and readers should have the let's say the lowest level of permissions, and same the authorities, let's say they can read. If you want to or if you don't if you want to set permission metrics on OBC when you don't have any profile defined, you can easily, or you must easily just prepare the empty permission metrics. If it's set like this, it means that your OBC is authorized only against the workspace of application, so against the profiles of application. If not, as was in this, if there are no uptype profiles, it means you will use only the profiles of the you will not be authorized, and use cases will be authorized only against app profiles. You will see it when we will go to mapping of use cases to the profiles. And I think that's all about this. There are also some real examples, but these real examples could be good to go when you go through this documentation by yourself. And we will show you the live Metamodel at the end. So you will see it how it looks like. Another thing which is really important and must be defined are ancestors, because there are let's say a lot of features in the Metamodel which depends on the ancestor. So for or any application type or any type, so let's say AWSC or OBC can have more than one ancestor. So there could be multiple inheritance, but let's say normally there is only one, and it's like for AWSC there is a mandatory ancestor. It's let's say for this artifact which representing Workspace, the mandatory ancestor is AWSC interface, and for the artifacts which represents aggregated objects of the Workspace, the mandatory ancestor is OBC. What is really important to know is that according to the ancestors, the use case profile map, AR map, activity map, and roadmap are affected by this ancestors, and they are affected in the way that let's say all the use cases which are on the ancestor are automatically inherited. All the AR types which are defined on the ancestor are automatically inherited, and also the same is for activities and for roads. And on each of this type or each of these things, you can also define your own or override the logic of ancestor or the type which is defined on ancestor. Another thing which is affected by ancestors is a state list, because when you're defining the states, you must newly define also a state of ancestor which correspond to your state, and this change is also prepared because it will improve the possibility to prepare some statistics about the artifacts. So we will know how are the states mapped to the states of ancestors, and we can do aggregated statistics about them easily. So as I said, with ancestors, it looks in the 99% of applications it's really easy to find out about ancestors, and newly we defined ancestors by the attribute ancestor path list, and it's not necessary to write all the ancestors but just the direct ones. So in case of AWSC, it's UU business territory main geo1 UU AWSC. In the case of UU OBC, it's UU business territory main geo1 UU OBC. Their ancestor is artifact interface, but you don't need to put it here because we know about these ancestors and we can calculate it automatically. So this is the first change. This is the change against the previous version of Metamodel, when there was a ancestor path map which needed to be prepared precisely, and if there was some mistake, it leads to problems with the accessibility of commands of the ancestors. But right now we don't need it like this, and we are calculating the ancestor path map according to the list which is here. So here's just example how it looks in Bookit, and here's example how it could look in Dockit. So we have ancestor for the AWSC, and then for the document its ancestors OBC. Let's go to the states. States can be defined, or states are defined for on a metamodel level for AWSC, and also in a uptype level for OBC artifacts. When we're defining the state, it's really important to define the state list. In the state list, there should be or there must be at least two, or should be at least two states, one active and one final state, because it's good for a logic how the territory works with the artifacts. And also there should be defined state data schema, which is really important in the way how we can allow or what we can allow to set to attribute data schema which is on every artifact. And if the data schema is not defined, it's inherited from the direct ancestor. And to the states, the possibility to choose the state of the ancestor, if we talk about AWSC or OBC, there are these possibilities. So you have initial states, active, warning, problem, closed, alternatively closed, passive, system, and cancelled. Yeah. Briefly, I'll go to state data scheme. Right now, there is a state data scheme defined on, let's say, artifact interface, and this schema is this shape. So it means that there is a there is a progress with attributes current and weight, which are integer, and this is no string. That means that to the progress key you can add any key you want, but it's limited by 10,000 of 10,000 bytes or 10,000 charts. So so it's a really, let's say, it's a really big object, and it allows you to define whatever you want in this data state. And to be able to work with this in statistics and such stuff, it's important to prepare the state data scheme, which allow us to validate this the attribute of state data when you're trying to set it. And to this, I will just mention that right now we are not able to do this validation. You can prepare the data schema in the metamodels, but the validation is not functional right now. But it could be available soon. I suppose in 1 month it could be definitely done, and probably it could be 2 weeks, but let's say in 1 month we will be ready to validate it. And how to define state data. First, state data scheme. As I said, if you don't want to change the state data scheme, it will be inherited. So you don't need to add anything to this or add this attribute into the metamodel, but you definitely need to define state list. If you want to use state data scheme, you must think that it must fulfill the shape of ancestor. So it's not possible to define totally different data scheme which doesn't have this progress with current and weight, because it's a schema of ancestor and it's needed to fulfill this interface. And to the state list, for any state you need to define code, name, icon, and ancestor map. This is the new attribute we added in the version 1 of the schema, and here you must define to which state of the ancestor it corresponds. So easily, code is some code, name is name of your state, it's a U5 string, icon is ubml icon, and ancestor, in case of AWSC, it's at least AWSC, and in OBC it's OBC. So there is some example when there is no data scheme defined and just two states. The two, this is the minimal amount which should be defined: one active, one closed, name LSI item, and ancestor OBC EU business territory main GO1 OBC active, EU business territory main OBC closed. So the two of them, as I said, one active, one final state, and the icon is final, and for his active. Maybe here I want to mention that something we see in the metamodels, that sometimes there are used let's say active states, and their icon is used like a warning or problem. So it's probably better to set this state not just as active but as a warning or problem, because the let's say this colors should correspond with the type of state. I think it's all according to states, and we can go to overriding of attributes and synchronization. Here for the beginning, a few words how to use this pattern, because on let's say the application workspace or object of the artifact are represented in business territory of the objects of application workspace are represented in business territory as artifacts, and such artifacts have name, description, version, state, revision, and so on. But these attributes are not owned or managed by the artifacts, but they are managed by the objects of the application, so of the workspace or of the object of the application. So we need to be sure that the values which are in the business territory are the correct ones, because according to states there is some logic or something, and also it's not good to show to users different name than it's defined for the object or for the application workspace. So we need to be sure that these attributes are correct, and also there are some other attributes which are not managed by the application, and these are all the others, like responsible role, location of the artifact, access rights of the artifact, let's say explicit permissions, and home unit. These are also attributes of artifact, but they are managed by business territory. And if from some case the application want to work with them, it's also needed to let's say provide a possibility to not change it, not change this attribute without the knowledge of the application. And the easiest way how to do it is to override use cases which serves for setting of these attributes which the application have under its control or wants to know how are changed in case of attributes which are managed by business territory. And for this we're using a pattern of overriding, and this pattern says that if you want to overload a command, it's necessary to set it in the metamodel that you want to override it, sorry, and you need to implement it like if the user, I will use this, if any user call some use case of business territory, let's say artifact interface load, or it could be artifact interface set basic attributes. When this command is overridden, business territory will call to the application the command which overrides it, and it will be signed by the territory. So the application can easily know that it wasn't called by user, and the application will not call to business territory back. It will just, when this command is done, business territory just provide the data to the user or store the data in the application. If the, let's say, stuff is, if this starts by calling command of application, user calls command of application, this application know it wasn't signed by business territory, so it prepares the data it needs, and it, when it wants to get some data from artifact, it calls load. It calls it signed, because if the call is not signed, it means territory will call back to the application. So the application needs to sign the commands which are overridden by it. And in case of set state or something, it's the same as here. So if you override use case, you need to sign the calls to business territory. If not, business territory will call you back, and it means there could be a circle and deadlock, and it's something we don't want to do. And now to the synchronization. It's pattern which is good when you want to use it from business territory, because it could happen that the informations are not correct, they are desynchronized, and you know that in the territory is not a correct name or correct state of the artifact, which not correspond to the state of object or the application workspace. And if you want to allow users to, let's say, run the use case which can improve this situation, it's some synchronized use case, because the synchronized use cases doesn't change anything in the application. They only, let's say, read the actual attributes from the application by calling the command which is defined as the synchronized one, and then when they obtain the data, they just check if it's the same as in territory or not, and update the territory. So any user who doesn't have, let's say, rights for setting attributes or such stuff can run synchronization over artifact. So that's why the synchronization is good. And probably don't, I want to mention this, don't call synchronization for application use cases from updates application use cases. It's now obsolete pattern, and if you are calling, if you want to be sure that no update over artifact can be done without the application, just override the setting use cases, set basic attributes, and so on. And if you want to set an overriding of use cases, the easiest the way how to do it is to use ancestor map, and for each of your ancestors you can set which commands should be overridden. And it's also a bit change according to previous Metamodel. There you need to list all the commands of your ancestor. Now it's easier. You just need to list here or map here the commands which you really want to overload. So override. So overriding, you can, or you must choose the ancestor. If there is only one, it's business territory, AWSC or OBC in case of OBC. And then in interface use case command map, you just define the use case you want to override. You must define it with the whole name of application, type, and then its code, and you just tell which of your use cases of your application is used as the overriding one. And you also need to define it in the way that says the whole name of application and then the use case in case of AWSC. And if we will look down how it looks in the OBC, let's have it like this. You can see that in the case of OBC there is also always mentioned the type of the use case in a use case of the object. So yeah, and the DS commands which are here, like get, load, set basic attributes, set version, set responsible role, set home folder, set state, and delete. These are the commands which should be overridden, and we recommend to override at least set state, set basic attributes, and delete, because the first two of the commands working with the attributes which are managed by the application, and the delete is here because you should always think about the possibility to delete your objects from territory and let's say to terminate the application workspace or in its connection to business territory. When we talk about synchronization, there is a possibility to synchronize basic attributes, which is name, description, version, state, and let's say revision of the object, because it's needed when we want to call some commands from business territory which change attributes of application. And then you can synchronize home unit, folder unit, and responsible role. But I think these three are let's say obsolete, because they should be used before we were able to sign commands. From the time we are able to sign commands, it's much better to use just set to override set unit, set home folder, or set responsible role, and these are not much good to use right now, because the attributes they are synchronizing are owned by business territory and are not managed by the application. And if you want to if you are using synchronization, there is also a possibility that the name or description of the object you are trying to synchronize, or in the command you are calling, is not returned in UU5 string, but it's some multilingual JSON. So you have a separate attribute for English, separate for Czech, and so on. So if it's like this, you need to define LSI object AVSLC attribute list or LSI object OBC attribute list, where you can say if the name or description or both of these attributes are defined as a JSON object, and in such situation, during the synchronization, business territory will make the conversion of the JSON object into UU5 string with LSIs. So, synchronize command map. Simply, you just choose which synchronized commands you want to use. You don't need to use any of them, but we think that it's wise to prepare at least synchronized artifact attributes, because it could happen that some desynchronization can cause, and anyone then could just call synchronize over the artifact, and it will be updated. And if you want to do this, you just write down the use case for AWSC It's use case of your application, or the application and use case name for OBC, application, type name, use case name. It's really important to use it correctly because of authorization. And if you need, you have to define this LSI object. And in case of jokes, you can see that jokes are using this synchronized attributes, and they are using jokes load to this. And there is one important thing I didn't mention yet. It's that you need to have the attributes which should be synchronized in the DTO out of the command which is used for synchronization. And in case of I think it's a bucket. In bucket, the objects are used, the name and description are used as a LSI object. So you need for synchronization by using load, use this LSI object attribute list. Okay, I think the last theme I want to talk more detailedly is mapping of use cases to profiles, and then we'll go briefly to the rest, and then I will show you how we can work with Metamodel. So use case profile map is an attribute which allows you, or which you need to prepare, because you have to tell the business territory how the use cases of the application which are not in the territory are mapped to the profiles in case of AWSC, and are mapped to app type profiles, and also app profiles in case of OBC. This is really important because without a proper setting of use case profile map, the business territory is not able to provide you proper authorization, because the authorization is done according to the mapping of the use cases to the profiles. Okay, when we talk about mapping of use cases to AWSC, it's let's say a bit easier, because on a level of application workspace, we have only app profiles. So for any use case you want the user want to be able to call, it's necessary to define this binary mask, which is which have 32 positions, and it's because this mask corresponds to the profiles defined for the workspace, for the AWSC. So if you have 3 defined profiles, you should think about the first 3 positions of the Metamodel. If you have 10 profiles, you will think about first 10 position of the Metamodel. If you don't have, yeah, that's it. And you need to have at least 1 profile when we talk about AWSC. And if you want to say that there is a that the use case is mapped to the profile, it's just used 1 in the in this binary mask. So you can see that if we have like AWSC with 3 profiles, like authorities, executives, and readers, you need to map the commands into the. You can map the commands into these 3 profiles. So first position, authorities, second position, executives, third position, readers, and you can see that delete AWSC, only authorities, list, state history, all 3 profiles, load lifecycle, first 2 profiles, AWSC load, all the profiles. So when you mapping the profiles of application to the use cases of application, you use use case profile map, and for each use case you want the user to be able to call over the AWSC, you need to map it into at least one profile, or you can map it into all the profiles. It depends. And in case that your application also authorized on the level of OBC, it's good to let's say have a lot of nothing. I will be talking about this and when I get to OBCs. But it's always good to think about in which profiles the use cases need to be provided to proper group of users. And you need to take in account also how you are mapping the profiles to the unit groups, because it's in the profile map. So you need to think about this according to the permissions in business territory. So once I want to mention here that any use case you want to have over the application must be in this list to be able to provide a, let's say, authorization for the users. So if you have some libraries or any libraries which are added to the application, you need to add their use cases into use case profile map. If you don't do it, the use cases will be possible to be called, but they won't be authorized, because if the use case is not in this map, it's like it's mapped with all zeros in the profile mask, so nobody will have permissions to call it. So you can see that you must have here also the stuffs like sys get workspace if you want the users to be able to get a use cases which allows you to work with workspace. You need syslist audit log records by time and SPPs and so on if you want the users to be able to call such a commands according to AWSC. And if you add library for working with binaries, you also need to have this binary commands added to the use case profile map and map it to the profiles you define. So authorities, executives, readers, and you can see that there the commands are mapped to one, two, or to some of these use cases which are defined in profile list. When we go to OBC, it's a bit, let's say, harder to define it, because use cases of objects needs to be also authorized against workspace. So it's not only one binary mask, but there are two positions. So there is an array with two positions of binary mask, and if the profile list of OBC is not empty, so there are some uptype use cases, you need to define both mapping to up use cases and mapping to uuApp profiles, and also mapping to uuApp type profiles. So let's go to the examples. So as you can see, if there are 4 profiles in the OBC, and there are also these 3 profiles for AWSC, you are mapping the use cases to workspace and also to the profiles of the OBC. And the same for, let's say, here for this, but you can see the changes, or I want to find or some read use cases I want to allow for any users. So I added to all users of all profiles of AWSC and all profiles of this OBC, but this set attributes is allowed only for authorities and executives of application, and for executives, authorities, and writers of the OBC. So it's important to know that. And as I mentioned before, if there are no profiles defined for OBC, it's not needed, or you cannot map them. So you are mapping use cases only to application profiles. So the array have only one value, only one binary mask. Okay, so it's according to use cases. Now just briefly, according to context use cases. Because normal use cases are called over objects which already exist in the territory. So I can call set basic attributes or load over an artifact which is created. Or they are called in, let's say, context of some unit. So, context use cases are called in context of some unit. So you don't have a proper object in the application, but you want to authorize them according to location where you want to, let's say, start the use case. So if I want to create some artifact, I'm not able to authorize it against the artifact itself. I must authorize it against the location. So the location is unit. So create use cases are typical, let's say, example of context use cases. Another example could be some listing use case which can give me all the issues from some unit or something like this. But so you don't have an exact issue where you want to call such a listing. So you want to authorize it against organizational unit. And definition of such context use cases is also on a Metamodel, itself, or let's say on application types of the Metamodel, and you need to say which profiles of application are needed to, or in which profiles of application are the use cases mapped, and you also need to define some settings on the level of unit, because you need to map the profiles of unit to the profiles of the application, and the user is authorized against unit, but he calls the context use case. It doesn't seem easy, but if you are trying to define such a context use case, you just tell name of the use case. Profile mask means how it's mapped to the profiles of the application. Type list, which means which type of the context is used and in which type of context it will be shown. For now, we have only create context in business territory. So if you want your use case to be shown in the Daniel, please can you show the folder with yeah, if you want your use case to be shown in this create, you need to have a context use case for the type of create. So please, thank you. So this is the type list, the type of the context you want your context use case to be listed. And also, if you want to have this listed in here, you need to tell us the menu item name and menu item description, so we will be able to present to the user how it looks like. And in case of create, you also need to define a component, because if you don't set the component which is used for creation, we are not able to show such a form in our visual use cases. But if you don't want to have a possibility to offer use case in visual use cases, doesn't matter, because it could be used as context use cases and the command is authorized as a context. So no visual component will be shown, but if anyone tries to call the command, it will be authorized against as the context use case, and it could be used like this. When we talk about yeah, and we can see the real example, because we have an application which already use it. You know it, and it's a docket, and docket have a context use cases. It's defined. They have their own create document form, and in business territories where the docket is installed, you can create documents in any unit. You have access rights to do it. So it's about context use cases. Then there is possibility to create organizational context properties or to define organizational context properties. What are context properties? Simply, they should help you to how to say it, to work with the artifact or modify behaviors of the artifact features according to the location according to its location, means where it's located, or according to the user who works with it, or according to the type. And this is something which is hierarchical and could help to set such appearance as what will be shown on the artifact, or how something is displayed, and so on. And if you want to define this, you need to use such a configuration organizational context property map, and you need to set name of the property, description of the context property property, yeah, and you need to say where the context property should be created. You are defining it only on Metamodel, so you can list the application types which should be affected by it, and you can tell if it could be created also on unit, access role, or Metamodel, which means if you want to let's say work this context property in the field of location, in the field of the user who calls it, or just according to the applications. You can tell if it's necessary to create this application just only signed by application, or it could create anyone. It's by using up token required, and you can tell if this context property is just for a specific workspace. So you can have a context property which will affect only issues from one FLS and not from another workspace of FLS. But you can also have property which can affect all the let's say all instances of some application. Let's say books, because book is AWSC. It represents workspace, and you don't want to set context property just to affect one book. So you will do it like workspace required false. I don't want to talk about this much, but actually we have only one context property in business territory. It's defined, but not let's say not much used, and it's property for some script configuration, and it could be created by anyone over any artifact interface in a territory, but especially it should be prepared on some unit, and that's it to context property. Just briefly, according to artifact relations, this stuff is a bit different from context properties, because as I said at the beginning, artifact relations are inherited, or types of artifact relations are inherited from the ancestors, and we have these two types defined on artifact interface. So every artifact have the possibility to create general or on every artifact could be create general AARs or AARs from other territory. The the fact I want to mention is that if you are creating artifact relations, it must be done by the signed call of artifact interface create, which means that if application wants to create some artifact relation, it needs some command of the application. Some command of the application is needed, which will call this command to business territory and will be signed. So it's not allowed to create artifact relation by the user's desire or for any artifact in any territory and so on. And when you want to define your own artifact relation, you have the possibility. You can also try to override the artifact relation, but I don't want to talk about it right now. And when you want to have your own, you need to define unique relation key, name, description, tile component tag if you want a special component which will be used to show your AR in a artifact interface AR list by site A or by site B, and you can specify on which type of artifact instances the artifact relation could lead. So you can tell probably, let's say, if I will have a specific artifact relation in second line support, I could have here an artifact relation which is really prepared just to link the issues from first line support. In such a case, there would be first line support issue, and such a artifact relation can be created just to link follows the issue, not other artifacts. And maybe the usage of this is if you want to have some special relations, not only the general one, which could be done between any artifact types, the same as the interterritorial one. And last things, just briefly, activities, the same situation as with artifact relations. So they are defined few types over artifact interface, and they are inherited to any artifact. So over any AWSC or any OBC, you can create use case activities of do it, info, decide, reserve time, and milestone. These are the types of activities which are defined in artifact interface. There can be overridden, or you can define your own activities. But let's say activity is a really complex object, and it could be a special open session just where we can just talk about activities and how you can override them or define your own custom activities, which should be also good, but it's not really easy to prepare it properly. And last thing I want to talk about, it's a route map of which should be defined, and I want to mention that there is a big improve according to the last version, because we made it also that routes are inherited from ancestor. So every OBC or every AWSC artifact have these routes: user gate, artifact detail, artifact info, artifact permission, activity list, and activity detail. So you don't need to define them. You will have them from OBC or AWSC. So it won't happen again that your application doesn't have defined route for activities or for activity detail as it happened before, or as it happens before. And if you want to override this or define, maybe here is better to override it, because definition of own routes on artifacts in business territory doesn't make much sense. But if you want to use overriding, there is a good example how we use it, because route have only two or let's say three attributes. First is the key, which is in the route map. It's the identification of the route. Then you have route name, which is used in the router. So it's used somewhere here. I will show it here. It's so this is the name of the route. User gate, artifact. Oh, this is the use case, but I will go and cancel it, and we will see that on the info we will have user gate unit info. If I go to activities, I will have user gate activity list. Oh, sorry. So when you have your AWSC artifact, you have this route by default. User gate AWSC detail. We show our component with AWSC, and the same for the others. But if you want to override it with some of your name, you can have user gate issue. Oh, sorry. In this case, probably book detail. If I will use it when we go on the book in business territory, and you can also set which component should be in the content of the artifact. So if you prepare, let's say, in our basic info is just there is just a component which shows basic info of AWSC. If you want to have here something special, you can define your own basic info, and you can set it. You can set it in the route instead of this, and we will show your component in the content of business territory. So that's possibility how to use it. But you don't need to do anything if you are happy with the content of the default routes. And as I told before, it's same over OBC. And you can also see that on the OBC and AWSC, we override the name of the route of artifact detail and the component which is used here. And on OBC, it's OBC detail, and there is OBC routes detail, special component. But for activity list, activity detail, and so on, we used the default component and default route, which is defined on artifact interface. And that's all I want to show you. And now Daniel will show you the live demo. He will show you the Metamodel we have prepared. It's a docket. Bookit. Sorry, it's Bookit, and we will show you how we calculate the stuffs which are not in the Metamodel to the cache. And
so it will be just a quick example of how the Metamodel, for example, for Bookit looks like. I'll show you here. We've got the prepared one in schema version 1.0, code of the application Bookit main go1. Just to know, Bookit got only uuAVSC object. It doesn't have OBC, so all we need is just this one JSON to install the application to business territory, and also the name of the application, description, version of the application, the icon of that will be used for the uuAVSC object in business territory, default category, as we were talking about, for application workspace to control. State data scheme is the same as on the ancestor, so we've got the progress, wait, and current in it, and defined state list. So you can see Bookit got four states under construction. That's same as the active state on the uuAVSC ancestor, test, active, and closed. Closed is same as the closed on the uuAVSC. Then we've got defined default permission metrics. Default permission metrics for uBookit got 6 rows because Bookit got 6 profiles defined: authorities, executives, reviewers, test readers, and guests. Then we got LSE object AVSC attribute list. The Bookit used the name as a JSON structure, not as the UU5 string, so they need to define it here. Then we've got the ancestor path list. So as you can see, they've got only this object that's as the ancestor of uuAVSC, and ancestor map, where we defined that uuAVSC set basic attributes is overridden by uuBookKit main GO1 update book. Then we've got the synchronize UU command map, where as you can see that for synchronization of artifact attributes we used the BookKit getBook command, and then we've got all the use cases of the BookKit defined in use case profile map and mapped to the profiles of the application. So you can see every system commands for connection, setup workspace, all from the app server must be here. Then we've got defined use cases that we want to use in BookKit from the uuAVSC, so authorize me, get load, and so on. We are using activities, so we need to define use cases for activities, and here it uses on commands for binary and all their commands for the work with the application. So as you can see, there is an empty roadmap here. And I'll go to the installation. So for the installation, we are using command install uuApp defined in business territory, where you will send the attribute data in multi-part, just the JSON that I showed you before. After I send it, it will give me 200 defined, and we prepared the new command called load type definition. That's just for you to look if the application is installed properly. So as you can see, I will load, and this is how we stored this Metamodel in our type cache in business territory. So as you can see, there are same profiles, authorities, executives, reviewers, and so on, and use cases of the application. Here, for example, I want to show you that I'll find one here. The uuAVSC got commands for working with AARs, artifact relations, but in this Metamodel we are not working with artifact relations. So to type cache, we added these use cases from the ancestor with 0 profile mask. So you can call it, but no user will have access. We will have rights to call this command. So
you can also show some artifact interface command, because they were not in the map and they are here.
Yeah. Also here, as you can see, we've got the activity set state that was defined here only for uuAVSC. I think here, and here to the type cache we store it also as the UU artifact interface, so you can call not only uuAVSC set state, but you can call it as well as the ancestor command UU artifact interface. So I will see, as you can see, there is almost 270 commands. So yeah, the next thing, roadmap, as we were talking about, it will be filled by the roadmap of the ancestor. So in the Metamodel here, you've got empty roadmap, but we filled it with the roads of application workspace. So you can see that you will have the roads for detail, for artifact permissions, settings, activity lists, and activity details. Part, as you can see, ancestor is the uuAVSC. We filled the ancestor path map, so you can you know that uuAVSC has the ancestor of artifact interface. This is also your non-direct ancestor, and so on. The default icon, default permission metrics, up to the integer form, and states of the application. Here in the ancestor state map, in the JSON we defined only the direct ancestor uuAVSC active, but to the type cache we store it also for artifact interface, because the uuAVSC active state has the same ancestor state map for artifact interface. Next thing, just some information for us that it's the AVSC, not the OBC, and so on. What metamodel is it? LSC objects that we told that the name is not sent by the U5 string, and also we filled the activity type map. So you can, here in JSON we defined only the commands for work with the activities, but we didn't define what activity types we want. So for every application type, for every application workspace, we will give them the default activities from the ancestor. So default activities defined in business territory. The type is milestone, reserve time, do it, decide, or info for your information. Here you only know that it's a reference because the whole activity metamodel is stored only on the U artifact interface types. So here we just got path where we will find the actual metamodel for the activity. And I think that's all for me. And I got the information that you should call David Kimmer after our presentation, so I will call him. Hello?
Hello, Dan. Do we hear each other? And do we see each other?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had to stop the stream, so of course I don't know what is on the screen for the rest now, but you know, first it was excellent open session, thank you. But on the other hand, it was like, you know, good old times on MathPhys when I was studying maths and physics, and I was watching some of some of the teachers, and even when I got some known word, I was almost sure that this word in this context doesn't mean the same as I'm used to. So I would like to tell to all the audience that this is quite a difficult thing. It's maybe one of the most difficult things and most of the difficult topics in our architecture. On the other hand, the territory and its UApp metamodel will help us quite a lot, because this is something which will like prevent hundreds and hundreds of man hours to be repeated and redeveloped and redesigned again and again in all of our products and projects. And this is for consultants, real power users, and especially developers. So it's not expected that every common user of business territory will understand all of this you presented here. Just like the experts which will work on the application development and on the project development. So if you didn't understand everything, or you understand almost nothing, still don't be scared and don't think that territory is for nothing and your model is for nothing. It's very, very useful. And actually, it's a great advantage for the unicorn. Maybe I will tell you some example. You know, well, I prepared some tool to help me. You know, can you see it? Maybe I should.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, you know, this is Lego Technics, you know, nice boat, and it works actually. So you can move the crane here like this and like this. Actually, there was a submarine, but Christoph decomposed it like half a year ago, so never seen it since. But you can see, and it even has a rudder down there, you know, for middle, and it works. And it's super easy to manage it now. So if you want to move the rudder, you just like turn the wheel here. But it took me like 5 hours to assemble it, just the part which moves the rudder, because it's like 1,000 pieces within the boat. Yeah. So if you want just to use this toy, it's super easy and everybody understands it. If you take the box and you want to assemble the boat, well, it needs to have some skills, and it needs you know, quite a lot of time to prepare it. So, and this is not the most difficult Lego Technics part. You know, maybe I will share a screen for a moment. And look at this. That's a great thing. I have to buy it sometime, of course. It actually works, you know, it has an engine inside, so it can move, it can gather those small plastic pieces, and it can, there's even a ladder for the workers to go in, you know. And it's 7,000 pieces, I think. And you can like control it through your mobile phone. Excellent tool, you know. Perfect. And if it's assembled, I'm sure that even my 4-year-old son will be able to play with it. But if you want to assemble it, look at the manual. This is the operation instructions. I'm just in the middle of it. It's like page 318, you know. And we can go down, and still you have almost nothing. Still you have just this bottom part of the vehicle. Yeah. So, but still there are many people who will buy it and which will have a great joy in assembling this. And I hope we will find like co-workers amongst you which will have a great joy in assembling this application Metamodels, and which will then be super productive, because do it like this will be so much faster than develop it in traditional way, that the advantage and the added value of such coworkers will be like 100 or maybe 10, but I'm sure almost 100 times bigger than traditional developers. So this is just an example. So don't be afraid, and many people don't assemble such a thing, but they can use it. Yeah. So, and to help you with creating Metamodels, so guys showed you the implementation, how it's done, and how it's designed. There's a lot of great work behind that. But to create it as a developer or designer, it would be quite difficult, because Dan said it's just one JSON and it's super simple, but it's JSON and he had a simple one at like 200 lines. There could be Metamodels which have thousands of lines. So we prepared an application which is called uuApp Model Kit, which will simply allow you to model the structure of the application and the structure, how commands are connected to application types and to application profiles and application uptype profiles, and all the other attributes Luboš spoke about will be possible to model in this application. So you will simply model your application here, and in some later version of Model Kit, but not far from today, it will be possible to generate the uuApp Metamodel from this application. I would be glad to show you the application, but the timing didn't fit. You know, we need like 2 or 3 weeks to show you this part of the application which generates the application Metamodel. So there will be some other open session, but it's almost here. You know, so it will be available like in a month. So all these difficulties can be generated from the tool we will provide you to your teams. So I think that it's very important to understand what was said today. And if you don't understand this, and you are a designer, you are a business or application architect, study it, please. It's a necessary and like a mandatory part of your knowledge if you want to work in Unicorn. And yes, it's difficult, but it helps a lot. So if you understand this, you will be much more successful in what you are doing now. And that's it, actually.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so now it's your time, guys, to wrap up. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So thank you,
Thank you.
thank David, and thank all of you who were watching. It's all today, and don't be scared of Metamodel. It looks terribly, but it could be handled. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.